I'm Sarah Mitchell, 34 years old, and I always thought growing up in Connecticut meant I had the perfect family. My grandmother Eloise was the one person who truly saw me, always promising that someday her savings and precious jewelry collection would be mine. When she passed, I never expected the words that would come out of my mother's mouth. "You don't deserve it, Sarah. We're giving everything to Michael." The betrayal cut deep. But what my parents didn't know was that my career as a financial analyst had prepared me perfectly for this moment. I found documents that would change everything. If you're joining me on this journey, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and stay with me to see how letting the bank reveal the truth gave me back more than just my inheritance. I grew up in a modest two-story colonial house in Westport, Connecticut, where the changing seasons marked our family traditions and the passing years. My grandmother Eloise lived just 15 minutes away, in the same house where she had raised my father. She was a remarkable woman who had worked as a librarian for 40 years, saving diligently and investing wisely despite my grandfather passing away young. From my earliest memories, Grandma Eloise and I shared a special bond. While my parents attended every one of my brother Michael's football games and wrestling matches, Grandma would take me to museums, bookstores, and afternoon tea. "Your mind is your greatest asset, Sarah," she would tell me, her eyes crinkling at the corners when she smiled. "Michael may have your parents' attention, but you and I understand what truly matters in life." Michael was 3 years older than me, with our father's athletic build and our mother's charismatic smile. He breezed through school with average grades but exceptional popularity, while I buried myself in books and advanced placement classes. Our parents never missed an opportunity to showcase Michael's trophies or retell stories of his game-winning plays at family gatherings. My academic achievements, honor roll, debate team victories, scholarship offers, were acknowledged with quick nods before conversation returned to Michael's latest accomplishment. I learned to find validation in Grandma Eloise's proud smile when I showed her my report cards or shared my dreams of working in finance. "You're so much like me," she would say, showing me her meticulously kept financial records and collection of antique jewelry that had been passed down through generations of women in our family. When I was 16, during one of our Saturday afternoon teas in her sunroom overlooking her carefully tended garden, Grandma took my hand and said something I would never forget. "Sarah, when I'm gone, all of this will be yours, my savings, my jewelry, this house. Not because you're my only granddaughter, but because you're the only one who truly appreciates what these things represent: independence, security, and our family's history." I didn't fully understand the significance of her words then, but they gave me comfort during the lonely high school years when Michael's homecoming king photos dominated our living room while my scholarship announcements were tucked away in the kitchen drawer. After graduating summa cum laude from Boston College with a degree in finance, I secured a position as a financial analyst at a respected firm in New York City. The irony wasn't lost on me that the skills I was developing, scrutinizing financial documents, tracking assets, understanding banking regulations, would eventually become my greatest weapons in the battle I didn't yet know was coming. Meanwhile, Michael floated between jobs after barely graduating from a state college that our father had pulled strings to get him into. He worked briefly at our father's insurance company before being mysteriously reassigned, then tried his hand at real estate before abandoning it after 6 months. Despite his professional instability, our parents continued to support him emotionally, and I would later discover, financially. Every Sunday dinner at our parents' house featured updates on Michael's latest venture or relationship, with minimal interest in my steadily advancing career or the apartment I had saved for and purchased on my own in Brooklyn. Through it all, my weekly visits to Grandma Eloise remained my emotional anchor. As she entered her late 70s, our roles gradually shifted. I began helping her with household tasks, reviewing her investment portfolio when she asked for a younger pair of eyes, and driving her to medical appointments. During these years, she would occasionally remind me of her promise showing me where important documents were kept and explaining the significance of certain jewelry pieces. The sapphire earrings were worn by your great-grandmother on her wedding day, she once told me, and someday you'll wear them on yours. Those quiet moments with Grandma, learning about our family history and her financial wisdom, were preparing me for a future confrontation I couldn't have imagined. Grandma Eloise's health began to decline shortly after her 83rd birthday. What started as occasional forgetfulness progressed to a concerning heart condition requiring frequent monitoring. As her mobility decreased, I adjusted my work, scheduled to spend 3 evenings a week at her house, preparing meals for her refrigerator, organizing her medications, and simply keeping her company. Michael, despite living only 20 minutes from Grandma's house compared to my hour-long commute from Brooklyn, visited perhaps once a month, usually when our parents mentioned they would be stopping by as well. "Don't worry about Michael," Grandma would say when I expressed frustration at his absence. "He takes after your father. Never could sit still in a quiet room with an old woman." She'd wink, but I could see the hurt beneath her humor. On a chilly October afternoon during my 3rd year at the financial firm, Grandma asked me to drive her to her attorney's office. "It's time to update my will," she explained as I helped her into my car. "I want to make sure everything is perfectly clear." I sat quietly in the corner of the attorney's office as Grandma spoke with Mr. Harmon, her lawyer of 30 years. "I want to be explicit that my granddaughter Sarah Mitchell receives my entire estate," she stated firmly. "The house, all bank accounts, investment portfolios, and especially my jewelry collection. My son Daniel and his wife have been provided for through life insurance policies from years ago, and my grandson Michael has received substantial financial support for his education and various endeavors." Mr. Harmon nodded, making notes. "And you're certain about this distribution, Mrs. Mitchell? No provisions for your son or grandson?" Grandma's voice was unwavering. "Sarah is the only one who has shown genuine interest in preserving our family's legacy. She's spent years learning about each piece of jewelry, the history of this house, and has helped manage my finances with respect and care. This isn't about favoritism. It's about entrusting these things to the person who will truly value them." On the drive home, Grandma reached over and patted my hand. "I've also designated you as the direct beneficiary on my bank accounts and investment portfolio," she said. "The house and physical items will have to go through probate with the will, but the financial accounts will transfer to you immediately. I've left detailed letters with the banks explaining my wishes." I tried to protest, uncomfortable discussing her mortality, but she silenced me with a gentle squeeze of my hand. "It's all arranged, dear. Just promise me you'll use some of it to finally take that trip to Paris you've been dreaming about since you were 12. As her condition worsened, I began spending more nights on the pull-out sofa in her living room, rushing to make my 8 a.m. meetings in the city after ensuring her morning nurse had arrived. My supervisor at work, understanding my situation, allowed me to work remotely 2 days a week, but the exhaustion of balancing full-time work with caregiving began to take its toll. My parents visited weekly, bringing prepared meals and staying, for exactly 1 hour before citing other commitments. During these visits, I noticed my mother scanning the room, her eyes lingering on Grandma's jewelry box and antique furniture. Once, I overheard her telling my father, "Mother really should consider moving to assisted living. This house is too much to maintain, and those valuables should be properly stored elsewhere." When I mentioned this to Grandma, she gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Promise me you won't let them change anything. This house stays as it is until it passes to you." The winter was particularly harsh that year, and pneumonia sent Grandma to the hospital 3 days after Christmas. I took emergency leave from work, sleeping in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside her bed for 11 nights. Michael visited twice, spending most of the time in the hallway on his phone. My parents rotated shifts during daytime hours, but insisted I remain overnight since I didn't have children to care for, like they did with Michael's 2 young sons from his first marriage. On January 9th, with snow falling gently outside the hospital window, Grandma Eloise passed away while holding my hand. Her last words to me were barely audible. Remember what's in the blue envelope in my desk drawer. In the haze of grief that followed, I handled the funeral arrangements with minimal input from my parents, who seemed preoccupied with getting the house in order and securing valuables almost immediately after Grandma's passing. At the funeral, I noticed my mother wearing one of Grandma's pearl necklaces, something that made my stomach tighten with unease. Michael delivered a brief, generic eulogy that could have described any grandmother, never mentioning the thousands of books Grandma had recommended to patrons during her library career or her passion for gardening. As I stood at the cemetery, watching her casket being lowered into the ground, I felt utterly alone in my grief, clutching the blue envelope I had retrieved from her desk. Inside was a handwritten letter detailing her bank accounts, investment portfolios, and insurance policies, with my name clearly indicated as beneficiary on each one. "This information is for you alone," she had written. "Trust your instincts. And remember that financial independence is the foundation of all other freedoms." 2 weeks after we laid Grandma Eloise to rest, our family gathered at Mr. Harmon's law office for the official reading of the will. The room felt smaller than I remembered, with dark wood paneling and leather-bound law books lining the walls. My father sat stiffly in a high-backed chair, my mother beside him fidgeting with her pearl necklace. Grandma's pearl necklace. Michael slouched in his seat, occasionally checking his phone despite Mr. Harmon's pointed glances. I had dressed carefully that morning in a charcoal gray suit, the same one I wore to important client meetings, drawing strength from the professional armor. As Mr. Harmon prepared to begin, my father abruptly cleared his throat. "Before we start, we should discuss how we'll be handling Mother's estate," he announced in the authoritative tone he typically reserved for insurance clients. Mr. Harmon paused, fountain pen hovering over the document. "I believe that's why we're here today, Mr. Mitchell, to review your mother's wishes regarding her estate." My father waved his hand dismissively. Yes, but as executor, I'll be managing the distribution of assets, and we've made some decisions as a family." This was the first I'd heard of my father being executor, and confusion bloomed in my chest. Grandma had explicitly told me she had named me as executor during our visit to this very office. Before I could speak, my mother jumped in. "We feel it's best for the family if we handle things our way, rather than following some outdated instructions." Eloise might have left. She wasn't always thinking clearly in her final months. The room seemed to tilt slightly as I processed her words. Mr. Harmon's expression remained professionally neutral, but I noticed his eyebrows inch upward. "Mrs. Mitchell, I assure you Eloise was of sound mind when she updated her will last October. Perhaps we should proceed with the reading to clarify her intentions?" My mother's smile tightened. "Of course, but Daniel will be making the final decisions regardless. We're simply making things right for the entire family." My stomach knotted as Mr. Harmon began reading, confirming exactly what Grandma had told me. The entirety of her estate was to pass to me, with specific mention of the jewelry collection to continue the tradition of female heirlooms. I was named executor, not my father. As Mr. Harmon continued reading, my father's face reddened and my mother's knuckles whitened around her purse strap. When the attorney finished, an uncomfortable silence filled the room until my father spoke. "Well, that's Eloise's opinion, but we'll be handling things differently. The house will be sold and the proceeds will be divided more appropriately among the family." My voice, when I finally found it, came out steadier than I expected. That's not what Grandma wanted. She was very clear about her wishes, both in the will and to me personally. My mother turned to me with a coldness I'd never seen directed my way before. "Sarah, you've always been so selfish. Did it ever occur to you that your grandmother wasn't thinking rationally? That she was manipulated during her vulnerable final years by the person spending the most time with her?" The accusation hit me like a physical blow. Manipulated? I was caring for her while everyone else was too busy. My father cut in, his tone leaving no room for argument. That's enough, Sarah. We've decided. The house sale proceeds and remaining assets will go to Michael. He has a family to support, and your grandmother would have wanted to provide for her great-grandchildren. Michael finally looked up from his phone, the beginning of a smug smile playing at the corner of his mouth. It just makes sense, sis. You've got your fancy finance job and apartment. I've got kids and a new business venture that needs capital. I turned to Mr. Harmon, desperately seeking an ally. This can't be legal. The will is clear. He shifted uncomfortably. While the will expresses Mrs. Mitchell's intentions, if the family agrees to an alternative distribution and the executor approves, my father interrupted. Which I do. It's settled. The room spun around me as I tried to process what was happening. But Grandma named me executor, not Dad. My mother stood abruptly, gathering her coat. Daniel has power of attorney from before your grandmother's passing. We've already begun the process of transferring assets. The jewelry has been moved to our safety deposit box for proper appraisal. I felt as though I'd been plunged into ice. Water. You took her jewelry? Those pieces were meant for me. They've always passed from woman to woman in our family. My mother's expression hardened into something I'd never seen before. You don't deserve it, Sarah. You've always thought you were better than this family, with your degrees and city apartment. Michael needs this more than you do. I turned to my brother, searching for any sign of discomfort with this betrayal, but found only thinly veiled satisfaction. My father stood, signaling the end of the discussion. It's decided. We'll handle the sale of the house and distribution of assets. Michael will receive the proceeds as an investment in his future and his children's education. As we exited the office, Michael hung back, placing his hand on my shoulder in a gesture of false sympathy. Don't worry, sis. I'll let you borrow the pearl necklace for special occasions. I shrugged his hand away, too stunned to form a coherent response. In the parking lot, I watched my parents and brother climb into their respective luxury vehicles, my brother's a brand new SUV I hadn't seen before, while I stood alone with the devastating realization that the family I thought I knew had been an illusion. The blue envelope in my bag suddenly felt heavier, a final message from the only family member who had truly loved me unconditionally. The drive back to my Brooklyn apartment passed in a blur of highway exits and traffic lights, tears occasionally blurring my vision as the reality of what had just happened sank deeper into my consciousness. By the time I unlocked my door and stepped inside, the emotional weight had become physical, and I collapsed onto my sofa, still wearing my coat. For 3 days, I barely left my apartment, calling in sick to work for the first time in my career. My phone filled with increasingly impatient texts from my parents, asking when I would stop being dramatic and accept the family's decision. Michael sent a single message, a photo of Grandma's antique mahogany writing desk now placed in his home office with the caption, "Thanks for understanding, sis." I alternated between periods of numb disbelief and crushing grief, not just for Grandma, whose wishes were being blatantly disregarded, but for the loss of my family as I had understood them to be. Every memory from childhood suddenly required re-examination through this new lens of betrayal. Had my parents always resented me? Had my academic achievements only widened a gulf of disapproval I hadn't fully recognized? On the 4th day, I forced myself to shower, change clothes, and attempt to regain some semblance of normal functioning. My closest friend Amelia came over with groceries and listened as I recounted the events at the lawyer's office. "That can't possibly be legal," she insisted, outrage coloring her voice. "They can't just ignore a will because they feel like it." Her indignation awakened something in me, a sense that perhaps this wasn't just a painful family matter but a legal one with potential remedies. I called Mr. Harmon's office the following morning, but his receptionist informed me he couldn't discuss the case further as my father had officially retained him on behalf of the estate. This revelation sent me spiraling again, realizing how thoroughly my parents had orchestrated this takeover. When I finally returned to work the following week, I struggled to focus on financial analyses and client portfolios while my own inheritance was being systematically redirected. My supervisor noticed my distraction during a team meeting and pulled me aside. "Whatever's going on, Sarah, you need to either resolve it or compartmentalize it. Your work is suffering." That night, I tried one last attempt at reasoning with my parents calling their home phone since they had begun ignoring my texts. My mother answered, her voice immediately cooling when she recognized me. "Sarah, we've been through this. The decision is final." "But it's not what Grandma wanted," I insisted, hating the pleading note in my voice. "She specifically updated her will to make her wishes clear." My mother's response cut deeper than I could have anticipated. "Your grandmother wasn't in her right mind in those final months. You took advantage of her confusion and isolation to manipulate her into changing her will. We're simply correcting an injustice." The accusation struck like a physical blow. "That's not true. I loved her. I cared for her when no one else would." "You always did have a talent for revisionist history," my mother replied coldly. "Michael visited regularly and has always maintained proper family relationships, while you've been obsessed with your career and independence. Family legacy belongs with someone who values family, not someone who's been pulling away since college." After hanging up, I sat in my dark apartment, replaying her words. The stark reversal of reality, casting my caregiving as manipulation and Michael's occasional appearances as devotion, left me questioning my own memories. The gaslighting was so effective that for a moment, I wondered if I had somehow misunderstood Grandma's intentions despite her explicit statements. 2 weeks later, a marketing email from a luxury watch retailer included a customer review from none other than my brother, praising his recent purchase of a $5,000 timepiece. The casual mention of it being a gift to myself after a recent family windfall confirmed they had already begun liquidating Grandma's assets. That same evening, my father sent a group text announcing the sale of Grandma's house had been finalized, with proceeds invested appropriately for the family's future security. No details were provided about these investments, but the implication was clear. Michael was the beneficiary. I forwarded the watch review to Amelia with the caption, "Guess where the money for this came from?" Her response was immediate. "You need to fight this. Not just for the money, but because it's wrong." Other friends echoed this sentiment as I gradually shared the situation with my inner circle. My college roommate Rebecca, now a paralegal, was particularly adamant. "There are laws to prevent exactly this kind of thing. You need to consult an actual estate attorney who represents you, not your family." Still, I hesitated. Fighting my family in court would mean permanent fracturing of relationships that, despite this betrayal, represented my only blood connections in the world. What would holidays look like after legal action? Would I ever see my nephews again? Would the extended family I'd grown up with choose sides? The emotional toll mounted as weeks passed. I lost 8 pounds, developed insomnia, and found myself unable to concentrate on novels or shows that had previously provided escape. My performance review at work noted concerning decline in attention to detail and reduced client engagement. One particularly dark night, sitting on my apartment floor surrounded by old photo albums, I nearly convinced myself to let it all go, to accept the loss of both inheritance and family rather than prolong the pain with legal battles. I texted, "Amelia, maybe I should just move on. Is it worth destroying what's left of my family?" Her response arrived minutes later. "The people who could say, 'You don't deserve it' to their daughter have already destroyed the family. Now it's about justice. For your grandmother who trusted you to honor her wishes." 3 months after the will reading, a curious thing happened that would completely change my approach to the situation. While organizing my home office, I came across an old birthday card from Grandma Eloise that I'd saved from my 28th birthday. Inside, beyond her loving message, she had written, "I've added you as a joint account holder on my savings at First National. A woman should always have access to funds no one else controls." I stared at the card, a foggy memory surfacing of Grandma taking me to her bank years ago, having me sign some paperwork I hadn't fully understood at the time. With trembling hands, I retrieved the blue envelope from my bedside drawer, carefully, reviewing Grandma's handwritten notes about her accounts. She had listed 3 primary financial holdings: a savings account at First National Bank with a balance of approximately $145,000, an investment portfolio with Vanguard valued at roughly $380,000, and a smaller account at Connecticut Community Bank with around $42,000. According to her notes, I was listed as either joint account holder or direct beneficiary on all 3. This contradicted everything my parents had implied about their control over her assets. The next morning, I called First National Bank and, after verifying my identity, inquired about any accounts I might be associated with. The representative's response sent a jolt through my body. "Yes, Ms. Mitchell, you're listed as a joint account holder on an account established by Eloise Mitchell. However, I'm seeing some unusual activity I'd like to discuss. Could you come into a branch in person?" 2 hours later, I sat across from Mr. Peterson, a silver-haired bank manager who reviewed the account details with growing concern. "This account was set up as a joint account with right of survivorship," he explained, turning his computer screen so I could see. "That means upon Mrs. Eloise Mitchell's death, full ownership would automatically transfer to you as the surviving account holder. No probate required." He scrolled down to recent transactions. "However, I'm seeing a wire transfer initiated on January 15th that moved the entire balance to another account. The transfer request came with a power of attorney document for Eloise Mitchell, signed by your father, Daniel Mitchell." My breath caught. January 15th? That was 6 days after my grandmother died. Mr. Peterson's expression grew serious. "The power of attorney document would have become invalid upon Mrs. Mitchell's death. Do you have a death certificate with you by chance?" Fortunately, I had brought my entire file of Grandma's documents, including several copies of the death certificate. Mr. Peterson examined it carefully, then picked up his phone. "I need to escalate this to our legal department immediately. A power of attorney has no legal effect after death, and if the transfer was initiated by someone other than yourself as the surviving account holder, we have a serious issue." While Mr. Peterson made his calls, I reviewed the Vanguard statements included in Grandma's blue envelope. According to the beneficiary designation form she had included, I was named as the primary beneficiary on her investment portfolio. Yet my parents had somehow gained control of these assets as well. With growing confidence, I asked Mr. Peterson if he could check if there were any other accounts at First National under Eloise Mitchell's name. His search revealed a safe deposit box registered jointly to Eloise and Daniel Mitchell. "Would this have contained jewelry by chance?" I asked, thinking of the family heirlooms my mother had claimed were in their possession for appraisal. "We don't track the contents," Mr. Peterson replied, "but customers typically use safe deposit boxes for valuables, important documents, or jewelry." By the end of that meeting, First National's legal department had frozen the transferred funds, pending investigation, and I had scheduled appointments with both Vanguard and Connecticut Community Bank for the following week. At Vanguard, I discovered that someone had submitted paperwork attempting to change the beneficiary designation on Grandma's accounts just 3 weeks before her death. Paperwork that Vanguard had flagged as suspicious because the signature didn't match their records. They had sent verification documents to Grandma's home address, which I realized must have been intercepted by my parents during their frequent check-ins during her final weeks. Because the change was never verified, the original beneficiary designation, naming me, remained in effect. The Connecticut Community Bank revealed similar attempts to transfer funds using the power of attorney, which they had processed without questioning the timing relative to Grandma's death. However, Once I provided the death certificate and beneficiary documentation, they immediately recognized the error and began their own investigation. Over the following 2 weeks, I had daily phone calls with bank representatives, compliance officers, and eventually a financial crimes investigator from First National. The picture that emerged was both shocking and validating. My parents had systematically attempted to redirect my grandmother's assets despite her clear wishes and legally binding designations. The most disturbing discovery came when the financial crimes investigator shared copies of the wire transfer forms with me. My father's handwriting was unmistakable on the transfer instructions, but the signature purporting to be mine authorizing the joint account transfer was clearly forged. "This isn't just a family disagreement anymore," the investigator explained gently. "Forgery and fraudulent use of a power of attorney after death potentially constitute criminal banking fraud." Armed with documentation from all 3 financial institutions, I finally scheduled a consultation with an estate attorney recommended by First National's legal department. Ms. Rivera listened attentively as I explained the entire situation, reviewing the bank documents, Grandma's notes, and the copy of the will I had received from Mr. Harmon before my father retained him. "You have a remarkably strong case," she concluded, arranging the documents into organized piles. "Your grandmother took extraordinary measures to ensure her wishes would be carried out, establishing you as joint account holder and direct beneficiary on her financial accounts, specifically to avoid the complications of probate. The attempts to circumvent these designations using an expired power of attorney constitute serious financial misconduct." For the first time since Grandma's death, I felt a sense of solid ground beneath my feet. The bank's investigations had validated what I knew to be true. Grandma had wanted me to inherit her assets, had taken legal steps to ensure it would happen, and my family had actively worked to undermine her wishes. As devastating as this confirmation of betrayal was, it also provided a clear path forward. Before leaving Ms. Rivera's office, I asked the question that had been haunting me: how do I confront my family with this information? Her response was measured and strategic. "First, we secure your financial assets through the bank's fraud investigations. Then, we prepare a comprehensive case regarding the will and probate assets. Only when our position is unassailable do we approach your family, and when we do, it should be from a position of absolute certainty and strength." On the train ride home, clutching a folder of bank statements and beneficiary designations, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, a sense of my grandmother's presence, as if she had anticipated this betrayal and meticulously prepared me to counter it. The financial analyst she had encouraged me to become was now the exact person needed to unravel this web of deception. With the bank's investigations underway and Ms. Rivera building our legal case, I entered a phase of methodical preparation. The financial analyst in me took over, creating spreadsheets tracking every account, every attempted transfer, and every contradiction between my parents' claims and the documented reality. Ms. Rivera advised me to communicate minimally with my family during this time, responding to messages with non-committal phrases and avoiding any mention of the financial investigations. "The element of surprise will be crucial," she explained during one of our weekly strategy sessions. "The moment they realize you're building a case, they may attempt to cover their tracks or create alternative narratives." Following her advice, I maintained a facade of reluctant acceptance in my limited interactions with my parents and brother. When my mother texted about selling some of Grandma's furniture, since no one has space for those old pieces, I simply replied, "Do whatever you think is best." This apparent surrender seemed to satisfy them, and the frequency of their messages decreased. Michael stopped communicating entirely once he had nothing more to gloat about. Meanwhile, I assembled a comprehensive timeline of events, beginning with Grandma adding me to her accounts years earlier and ending with the most recent attempted transfers. I gathered phone records showing the hundreds of hours I'd spent at Grandma's house during her final years, medical records where I was listed as her emergency contact, and receipts from groceries and medications I'd purchased for her care. Ms. Rivera brought in a forensic accountant who specialized in estate disputes to review the financial documentation. His assessment was unequivocal. The pattern here shows deliberate misdirection of assets contrary to the legally established beneficiary designations. The fact that attempts to change these designations began in the weeks before death suggests premeditation. By the end of the second month of investigation, First National Bank had not only frozen the transferred funds, but had reversed the transaction entirely, returning the money to the original joint account, now fully in my name. Their fraud department provided a formal letter stating they had found compelling evidence of unauthorized activity and improper use of an expired power of attorney. Vanguard followed a similar process, confirming my status as rightful beneficiary and initiating the transfer of the investment portfolio into my name. Connecticut Community Bank took slightly longer due to their smaller legal department, but eventually reached the same conclusion. The financial institution's responses gave Ms. Rivera the leverage she needed to address the probate issues. Grandma's house, which had been sold, her jewelry collection, which my mother now regularly wore, and various personal possessions, which had been distributed among family members or sold. Now we need to document every item we can remember from your grandmother's home, Ms. Rivera instructed. Photos, descriptions, approximate values, anything that helps establish the inventory of the estate that should have passed to you through the will. I spent a weekend creating a detailed catalog of Grandma's possessions, from the sapphire earrings my great-grandmother had worn on her wedding day, to the first edition classic novels Grandma had collected throughout her career as a librarian. For items I lacked photos of, I found similar examples online to include as visual references. As this documentation phase continued, the bank representatives and I developed a rapport, with several expressing personal outrage at what had happened. Mr. Peterson at First National was particularly supportive, occasionally calling just to check on my well-being and providing updates on their investigation. During one such call, he mentioned something that would prove instrumental. Our fraud department has completed their review of all accounts associated with your family members, and we've found something interesting. It appears your parents have been experiencing financial difficulties for some time. There are multiple overdraft incidents, several maxed-out credit lines, and a pattern of high-interest short-term loans over the past 2 years. This information provided crucial context for their desperate actions. A week later, Ms. Rivera's investigator uncovered public records of a pending bankruptcy filing for my brother's failed business venture. A filing dated just 3 weeks after Grandma's death that mysteriously never proceeded to court. The picture was becoming clearer. My family hadn't just wanted Grandma's assets out of spite or favoritism. They had needed them to resolve significant financial troubles. This realization brought a strange mix of emotions, a deeper sense of betrayal that they would steal my inheritance to solve their self-created problems, but also a sad understanding of the desperation that might drive such actions. With all financial accounts now secured and substantial evidence compiled regarding the probate assets, Ms. Rivera and I discussed the final approach. We have 2 options, she explained during a strategy meeting in her office. We can proceed directly to litigation, filing complaints in probate court, and potentially pursuing criminal charges for the fraudulent financial activities. Or we can attempt one final resolution meeting with your family, laying out the evidence and offering settlement terms that avoid a public legal battle. The thought of facing my family across a conference table, armed with evidence of their betrayal, sent a wave of anxiety through me. Yet the alternative, a protracted court battle that would permanently sever any possibility of reconciliation, seemed equally daunting. After careful consideration, I chose the resolution meeting approach. But it needs to happen on my terms, with my evidence fully presented, I insisted. I won't be gaslit or manipulated again. Ms. Rivera nodded approvingly. We'll invite them to my office next week. I'll be present as your legal counsel, and we'll have all documentation prepared in presentation format. You should also be ready for significant emotional reactions, anger, denial, possibly even attempts to reframe you as the villain in this scenario. To prepare for the inevitable emotional turbulence, I scheduled several sessions with a therapist specializing in family estrangement and financial abuse. Dr. Lambert helped me process the complex grief of losing my family's trust while strengthening my resolve to stand firm in the face of potential manipulation. Your grandmother trusted you for a reason, she reminded me during our final session before the meeting. Honor that trust by being as strategic and clear-headed as she knew you could be. The night before the scheduled family meeting, I received an unexpected call from Mr. Peterson at First National. Sarah, our investigation has uncovered something else you should know before tomorrow. We've found evidence that your parents borrowed substantial sums from your grandmother over the years, loans that were never repaid. There are promissory notes in her safe deposit box totaling over $200,000, signed by both your parents, with missed repayment dates going back nearly a decade. This final piece of the puzzle explained so much. My parents' determination to control Grandma's assets wasn't just about Michael's needs or their financial troubles. It was also about burying evidence of their long-term exploitation of Grandma's generosity. As I prepared for bed that night, I found myself looking at an old photo of Grandma Eloise from her 70th birthday. Her eyes held the same determination I now felt coursing through me. I won't let them take what you wanted me to have, I whispered to her image, and I won't let them rewrite who you were or what you wanted. The strategic preparation was complete. The banks had confirmed my rightful ownership of the financial accounts. Ms. Rivera had compiled irrefutable evidence of the will's validity and the improper distribution of probate assets. All that remained was to present this information to my family and witness the unraveling of their carefully constructed narrative, a confrontation I had been preparing for mentally and emotionally for months. As I fell asleep, I felt a curious sense of calm. Tomorrow wouldn't be about revenge or even reclaiming assets. It would be about honoring Grandma's wishes and standing firmly in the truth she had entrusted to me. Rather than meeting at Ms. Rivera's office as originally planned, I made a last-minute strategic decision that caught even my attorney by surprise. I want to do this at their house, during one of their Sunday family dinners, I explained. They'll be on their territory, feeling comfortable and in control. That's when the truth will have the most impact. Ms. Rivera raised her eyebrows but nodded slowly. Psychologically, that's actually quite powerful. They won't expect a confrontation in their safe space, and they'll have nowhere to retreat. I texted my mother that evening. I've been doing some thinking and would like to join Sunday dinner this week. I think it's time we moved past our disagreements. Her response came quickly, almost eagerly. Of course, dear. We've missed you. Michael and the boys will be here too. 6 o'clock. The calculated warmth in her message made my stomach turn, but I replied with matching false enthusiasm. The next step involved coordinating with the bank representatives who had been investigating my case. Mr. Peterson agreed to be available by phone at precisely 7:30, the time when Sunday dinner typically transitioned to coffee and dessert, in my parents' household. The bank's fraud investigator provided a detailed summary document that Ms. Rivera helped me simplify into clear, undeniable talking points. By Sunday afternoon, everything was prepared. I dressed carefully in a simple black dress that projected both professionalism and family dinner appropriateness, securing Grandma's small diamond earrings, the only piece of her jewelry I had in my possession, in my ears. These had been a college graduation gift, given directly to me years before her death, something my mother couldn't claim as part of the estate. I arrived at my parents' colonial-style home in Westport at precisely 6 o'clock, a bottle of wine in one hand and my phone, pre-scheduled with calendar alerts for each phase of my plan, in the other. My mother answered the door with a performance of maternal affection, embracing me as if the past 6 months of conflict had never happened. Sarah, darling, we're so glad you've come around. Family is everything, after all. The dining room looked exactly as it always had for Sunday dinners. My mother's formal china, polished silver, and crystal glasses arranged perfectly on the antique mahogany table that had been in my father's family for generations. The familiar setting created an almost surreal contrast to the confrontation I knew was coming. My father greeted me with a stiff nod from the head of the table, while Michael barely looked up from his phone when I entered. His two boys, ages 7 and 5, were absorbed in tablets in the living room, the glow of screens illuminating their small faces. Throughout the appetizer and main course, I maintained pleasant conversation, asking about my nephew's school activities and my father's golf game as if nothing were amiss. My mother, clearly relieved by my apparent surrender, became increasingly animated, detailing her plans for redecorating the living room with proceeds from selling some of those outdated pieces from your grandmother's collection. I noticed she was wearing Grandma's sapphire necklace, the companion piece to the earrings that should have been mine, and forced myself to compliment it as if I didn't recognize its origin. "That's beautiful, Mom. Is it new?" The flicker of discomfort across her face was quickly replaced with practiced nonchalance. "Oh, this old thing? It was your grandmother's, of course. I thought it should be worn rather than sitting in a box somewhere." As my father carved the roast beef, a task he performed with the same methodical precision he applied to all aspects of his life, I noticed a gleaming watch on his wrist that I didn't recognize, further confirmation of how they had spent my inheritance. At precisely 7:25, as my mother began clearing dinner plates to prepare for dessert, my phone alarm vibrated silently in my lap. I excused myself to use the restroom, where I took 3 deep, centering breaths before sending the prearranged text to Mr. Peterson. "Ready?" Returning to the dining room as my mother served apple pie, Grandma's recipe ironically, I waited until everyone was seated before speaking. "Before we continue, there's something important we need to discuss." My father's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "If this is about your grandmother's estate again, Sarah, that matter is closed." I smiled with a calmness that seemed to unnerve him. "Actually, it's very much open. I've spent the past few months working with First National Bank, Vanguard, and Connecticut Community Bank to untangle some concerning financial activities." My mother's face drained of color. "What are you talking about?" I reached into my purse and removed a single folded document, the fraud investigation summary from First National. "I'm talking about the fact that Grandma made me joint account holder on her savings account years ago. Upon her death, that account legally transferred to me. Not to the estate, not to Dad as executor, but directly to me as the surviving account holder." My father's expression hardened. "Your grandmother wasn't thinking clearly when she did that. We've corrected an oversight." "Interesting perspective," I replied, unfolding the document. "First National's fraud department has a different view. They've determined that the wire transfer emptying that account 6 days after Grandma's death, using an expired power of attorney, constituted banking fraud." Michael finally looked up from his phone, alarm registering on his face. "Dad? What is she talking about?" I continued before my father could respond. "Similarly, Vanguard has confirmed I am the sole beneficiary on Grandma's investment portfolio, despite someone attempting to change that designation in her final weeks. With a signature their verification department flagged as inconsistent with their records." My mother stood abruptly, hands shaking slightly as she gripped the back of her chair. "This is ridiculous. You're twisting things to create drama, as usual." "Am I?" I pulled out my phone, checking the time. "It's 7:30. Mr. Peterson, from First National's Fraud Investigation Unit, is expecting my call to discuss their findings directly with this family." The blood drained from my father's face. "You've involved the bank's fraud department? Sarah, this is a family matter." "It became more than a family matter when you forged my signature and misused a power of attorney," I replied, dialing the number. Putting the phone on speaker, I placed it in the center of the dining table. Mr. Peterson answered on the second ring, his professional voice filling the suddenly silent dining room. Good evening, Sarah. Are your family members present as discussed? Yes, Mr. Peterson. I'm here with my parents, Daniel and Elizabeth Mitchell, and my brother Michael. Good evening, everyone. I'm Robert Peterson, Vice President of Security and Fraud Prevention at First National Bank. I'm calling regarding the investigation into account activities following Eloise Mitchell's death on January 9th. My father attempted to interject, with his authoritative insurance salesman voice. Mr. Peterson, there seems to be a misunderstanding. As executor of my mother's estate, Mr. Peterson cut him off firmly. Mr. Mitchell, our records indicate your mother established a joint account with right of survivorship with Sarah Mitchell in 2018. Such accounts bypass probate and transfer automatically to the surviving account holder upon death. Our investigation has confirmed that the power of attorney document used to transfer funds from this account on January 15th was no longer valid, as powers of attorney terminate upon death. The silence in the room was absolute. Even my nephews had wandered in from the living room, sensing the tension. Mr. Peterson continued, his voice matter of fact. Furthermore, the signature purporting to be Sarah Mitchell's on the transfer authorization has been examined by our forensic team and determined to be fraudulent. These findings have been documented and shared with our legal department, who are prepared to proceed with appropriate actions unless the matter is resolved privately among family members. My mother's hand flew to her throat, fingers clutching Grandma's sapphire necklace. This is a misunderstanding, she whispered. Daniel was only doing what Eloise would have wanted. Mr. Peterson's response was measured but firm. Mrs. Mitchell, we also have on record several conversations between our branch manager and Eloise Mitchell, specifically confirming her intention for these accounts to transfer directly to Sarah upon her death. These conversations were documented in our customer relationship management system as per our protocols for significant account designations. After answering a few more questions and confirming that the funds had already been returned to the account now solely in my name, Mr. Peterson concluded the call. I trust this information helps clarify the situation. Sarah, please contact me if you need any further documentation or assistance. The room remained silent for several seconds after the call ended. My father stared at the phone as if it might explode, while my mother had sunk back into her chair. Michael's expression had transformed from alarm to calculation, likely assessing how this affected his financial situation. Finally, my father spoke, his voice noticeably less confident. Sarah, surely we can handle this within the family. There's no need for banks and lawyers and fraud investigations. I met his gaze directly. I've already handled the financial accounts. First National, Vanguard, and Connecticut Community Bank have all reversed the improper transfers. Those funds are secured. Now we need to discuss Grandma's house, which was sold against her wishes, and her personal property, particularly her jewelry collection, which was never intended for anyone but me. The carefully constructed facade of family unity crumbled visibly before my eyes. My father's authoritative posture slackened, my mother's hands trembled as she removed her designer glasses, and Michael's expression shifted from calculation to something resembling fear. The silence stretched uncomfortably until my mother attempted to salvage the situation. Sarah, regardless of some banking technicality, you must understand we were doing what was best for the entire family. Michael has the boys to think about, and your career has always been so stable. I had anticipated this exact pivot, the attempt to reframe their actions as family-oriented rather than self-serving. If that were true, I replied evenly, why wasn't I consulted? Why the secret transfers, the intercept of Grandma's mail, the forged signatures? Those aren't the actions of people making honest family decisions. My father cleared his throat, falling back on the businesslike tone he used when negotiating insurance claims. Perhaps we moved too quickly, without proper communication. We can discuss a more equitable distribution moving forward. That's not what this conversation is about, I said, maintaining eye contact. This is about honoring Grandma's explicit wishes, which were for me to receive her estate, wishes you actively worked to undermine. I turned to face Michael directly. And you've been spending the money already, haven't you? The new watch, the luxury SUV, the $5,000 timepiece you reviewed online? My brother's face flushed. I have expenses you couldn't understand. The boys' private school, alimony from my first marriage, the startup costs for my new business venture. Which is what, exactly? I asked, knowing the answer from Ms. Rivera's investigation. Because public records show you filed preliminary bankruptcy paperwork for your last business just weeks after Grandma died. Paperwork that mysteriously never proceeded after you suddenly had access to new funds. Michael's expression hardened. You've been investigating me? Your own brother? I've been investigating what happened to my inheritance, I corrected him. Every discovery has only confirmed what I already knew. Grandma wanted me to have her estate, took legal steps to ensure it would happen, and all of you conspired to redirect those assets against her wishes. My father abruptly stood, pacing toward the kitchen before turning back. This is getting out of hand. Sarah, what exactly do you want? Money? Fine. We can arrange a payment from what remains of the estate. The condescension in his tone, as if he were still in control, still the authority deciding what crumbs might fall to me, ignited a spark of indignation I had suppressed for months. What I want is an explanation, I said, my voice steady despite the emotion building in my chest. I want to understand how the people who raised me could look me in the eye at Mr. Harmon's office and say, "You don't deserve it," while stealing. What was legally mine? My words hung in the air, met with uncomfortable silence. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. We didn't have a choice, Sarah. We needed the money. The admission struck me like a physical blow. For what? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. My father's shoulders sagged as he returned to his seat. We've been in financial trouble for years. The recession hit my insurance clients hard, and I made some poor investment decisions trying to recover. We remortgaged the house twice, maxed out credit cards, took loans we couldn't repay. Michael stared at his plate, refusing to meet my eyes as my father continued. Mother knew some of it. She loaned us money several times over the years. $215,000, I supplied, recalling the promissory notes Mr. Peterson had mentioned. With signed loan agreements you never fulfilled. My mother's eyes widened. How could you possibly know that? The banks have been very thorough in their investigation, I replied simply. Those loan documents were in Grandma's safe deposit box, the one you cleared out after her death. A heavy silence fell over the table. My father's next words emerged as a reluctant confession. When she updated her will, leaving everything to you, we panicked. We'd been counting on her estate to resolve our debts. Without it, we faced potential bankruptcy, maybe even foreclosure. So you decided to take what was legally mine, I concluded. And Michael? How does he factor into this? My brother finally looked up, a flicker of defiance in his expression. My business was failing. Dad invested heavily in it, loans I couldn't repay. When Grandma died, they offered me a portion of the estate in exchange for not pursuing them for the business loans. The intricate web of financial desperation and deceit was finally becoming clear. And the jewelry? I asked, looking pointedly at the sapphire necklace still adorning my mother's throat. She touched it self-consciously. I always loved your grandmother's pieces. She knew that. She also knew they were meant to pass down through the women in our family, directly to me, I countered. You told me yourself countless times growing up how the women's jewelry never went to the sons to give to their wives. It passed directly, from mother to daughter, or grandmother to granddaughter. My mother had no response to this, her fingers still lingering on the sapphire pendant. The room fell silent again, the remains of our Sunday dinner growing cold as decades of family history were rewritten before our eyes. My nephews had retreated to the living room, sensing the adult tension but too young to understand its implications. After several moments, I spoke again, my voice softer but no less determined. Here's what's going to happen now. The financial accounts are already resolved. Those funds have been returned to me as the rightful owner. For the house and personal property, we have two options. I laid out the alternatives Ms. Rivera and I had prepared. Option 1. You provide a full accounting of all items from Grandma's estate, return the jewelry collection and any remaining personal effects, and compensate me for the fair market value of her house, which was sold without my consent as the named beneficiary. My father started to protest, but I held up my hand to continue. Option 2. My attorney files formal complaints in probate court, provides evidence of financial fraud to the authorities, and pursues full legal remedies, which would likely involve public proceedings and potential criminal charges for the banking violations. The threat of public exposure hung heavily in the air. My parents had built their social standing in Westport over decades. The insurance executive and his philanthropist wife, pillars of the community and the local church. Criminal fraud charges would devastate that carefully cultivated image. My mother was the first to break. The jewelry is in our safe. I can have it all returned to you by tomorrow. My father looked at her sharply, but she continued, Daniel, it's over. We were wrong, and Sarah knows everything. Turning back to me, she asked in a small voice, What about family holidays, the boys? Will we ever see you again? The question carried the weight of all that had been destroyed through their actions. I had considered this extensively in therapy, with Dr. Lambert preparing for this exact moment. That depends on what happens next, I answered honestly. I'm not interested in punishing you or destroying our family completely. But trust has been broken in fundamental ways, and rebuilding it, if that's even possible, would require complete transparency, genuine remorse, and tangible actions to make this right. Michael pushed back his chair abruptly. This is extortion. You're threatening us to get what you want. I met his gaze calmly. No, Michael. I'm offering a path forward that doesn't involve courts and criminal charges for what has already been done. That's not extortion. It's mercy. The word landed like a stone in still water, ripples of its implications spreading across their faces. My father, the consummate negotiator, recognized the position they were in. We'll need time to arrange for the house compensation. The market has been volatile, and we've used some of those funds to clear debts. I'm aware, I replied. Ms. Rivera has prepared a structured settlement agreement that would allow monthly payments over 5 years, with reasonable interest. It's far more generous than what a court would likely impose. As the reality of their situation settled in, my parents' expressions transformed from defensive to defeated. My mother removed the sapphire necklace with trembling fingers, placing it on the table between us, a small but significant act of surrender. We never meant for things to go this far, she whispered. We thought we could fix our finances and make things right before anyone noticed. By stealing my inheritance? I asked, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. By telling me I didn't deserve what Grandma explicitly wanted me to have? She had no answer for this, eyes downcast as decades of maternal authority evaporated in the face of undeniable truth. My father, ever practical even in defeat, asked, What are your terms for the settlement agreement? We should understand exactly what you're proposing. I outlined the arrangement Ms. Rivera had prepared. Return of all jewelry and personal effects. A detailed inventory of items already sold or distributed. Monthly payments totaling the fair market value of the house plus interest. And a signed acknowledgement of Grandma's original intentions and the improper actions taken to circumvent them. As my parents absorbed these terms, Michael abruptly stood. I need to make some calls. This affects my financial planning significantly. The naked self-interest in his statement without a hint of remorse or acknowledgement of wrongdoing, confirmed what I had long suspected about my brother's character. As he left the room, my father sighed heavily. He over-leveraged himself based on what we promised from your grandmother's estate. This will be difficult for him. As difficult as it was for me to learn my family conspired to steal my inheritance? I asked quietly. The question hung in the air without answer. By the time apple pie had grown cold on dessert plates, the confrontation had transformed into grudging negotiation. My parents requested 48 hours to consult with their own attorney before signing Ms. Rivera's agreement. I granted this reasonable request while making it clear that the bank's fraud investigations remained ongoing and could only be halted once a settlement was reached. As I prepared to leave, my mother followed me to the door, her composure finally cracking. "Sarah, will you ever forgive us?" she asked, tears welling in her eyes. The question caught me off guard despite my extensive emotional preparation. I considered the woman before me, the mother who had raised me, taught me to read, attended my school performances, and also the woman who had looked me in the eye and said I didn't deserve my grandmother's legacy. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Forgiveness might be possible someday, but trust will take much longer to rebuild, if ever." As I drove away from my childhood home, the weight of the confrontation finally hit me. Though physically and emotionally exhausted, I felt a profound sense of vindication, not just for myself, but for Grandma Eloise, whose careful planning and faith in me had ultimately prevailed against those who sought to override her wishes. The unraveling truth had been painful, revealing a family built on shakier foundations than I had ever imagined. But in that pain came clarity and, unexpectedly, a sense of liberation from familial obligations based on falsehood rather than love. The 6 months following that fateful Sunday dinner marked a period of profound transformation in my life. The legal resolution proceeded more smoothly than anticipated. My parents signed Ms. Rivera's settlement agreement after consulting their attorney, who likely advised them it was extraordinarily generous given the circumstances. The jewelry collection was returned within days, each piece wrapped in tissue paper and placed in the original velvet boxes my grandmother had kept them in. Holding the sapphire earrings that matched the necklace my mother had reluctantly surrendered, I felt a connection to my grandmother and the generations of women before her who had treasured these heirlooms. The financial recovery took longer but progressed steadily. My parents made their first scheduled payment for the house value, and the banks completed their processes transferring Grandma's accounts to me. As the dust settled on the legal and financial aspects, I faced the more challenging task of emotional recovery. The betrayal had shaken my understanding of family to its core, forcing me to re-examine every childhood memory through a new lens. With Dr. Lambert's guidance, I began the painful work of grieving, not just for Grandma, but for the family I had thought I had, and the relationships that would never be the same. Grief isn't linear, Dr. Lambert reminded me during one particularly difficult session. Some days you'll feel anger, others sadness, and occasionally unexpected moments of peace. All of these responses are valid. I established clear boundaries with my family, limiting communication to practical matters regarding the settlement agreement. My mother sent occasional texts attempting to re-establish casual conversation, which I answered politely but briefly. My father's communications remained strictly business-related, focused on documentation of payment transfers. Michael and I didn't speak at all. His final words at the Sunday confrontation had revealed all I needed to know about his priorities. 3 months after the confrontation, I made good on the promise I had made to Grandma's photo the night before the showdown. I used a small portion of the inheritance to book a 2-week trip to Paris, staying in a charming apartment in the Marais district with a tiny balcony overlooking a courtyard. Each morning, I would sip coffee and write in a journal, processing my experiences and emotions while surrounded by the beauty she had always wanted me to see. One evening, sitting at a small cafe on the left bank, I found myself smiling genuinely for what felt like the first time in a year. The weight hadn't disappeared completely, but it had shifted, becoming something I carried rather than something that crushed me. Upon my return to New York, I made two significant decisions. First, I established the Eloise Mitchell Memorial Scholarship at the public library, where she had worked for 4 decades. The scholarship would support young women pursuing degrees in library science or literature, continuing her legacy of making knowledge accessible to all. Second, I began volunteering with a financial literacy program for women leaving abusive relationships, using my professional expertise to help others establish the financial independence my grandmother had so valued. The work was profoundly healing, transforming my personal pain into something constructive. As for the inheritance itself, I approached it with the same careful stewardship Grandma had demonstrated throughout her life. I maintained her investment strategy with minor updates, lived within my means despite the substantial increase in my net worth, and used a portion to secure my future by purchasing a comfortable but modest brownstone in a quieter Brooklyn neighborhood. The antique jewelry remained in a safe deposit box, with selected pieces worn on special occasions as a tangible connection to my grandmother and the women who came before her. 5 months after the confrontation, I received an unexpected email from my mother asking if I would meet her for coffee, alone, without my father or brother. After discussing it with Dr. Lambert, I agreed, choosing a neutral location in Manhattan rather than anywhere associated with family memories. She arrived looking older somehow, the confident socialite persona diminished. After awkward greetings, she placed a small package on the table between us. "I found these in the attic," she explained, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Letters your grandmother wrote to you over the years, ones she never sent. I thought you should have them." I accepted the package wordlessly, unsure what this gesture meant in our fractured relationship. "I've been seeing a therapist, too," she continued, stirring her untouched coffee. "Trying to understand how things went so wrong, not just with your inheritance, but with our family dynamics for years before that." This admission surprised me. My mother had always dismissed therapy as unnecessary navel-gazing for people without proper coping skills. "What have you learned?" I asked, genuinely curious despite my guardedness. She met my eyes directly for the first time. "That I've been jealous of your relationship with my mother-in-law since you were a child. That I resented how she saw something in you that I couldn't or wouldn't see. That I've been compensating for my own insecurities by focusing all my attention on Michael because he needed it more obviously." The raw honesty caught me off guard. "That doesn't excuse what you did," I said quietly. "No," she agreed. "Nothing excuses that. But I'm trying to understand it so I don't continue the pattern." We talked for nearly 2 hours that afternoon, not resolving everything but beginning a different kind of conversation than we'd ever had before. I didn't leave with promises of reunion dinners or holiday celebrations, but with something perhaps more valuable, a glimpse of the woman behind the mother I thought I knew, and the possibility that genuine change might be possible, even if reconciliation remained distant. My father proved less capable of this kind of introspection. When I finally agreed to meet him 6 weeks later, he focused on practical matters, confirming payment schedules and asking perfunctory questions about my work. The emotional dimension of our ruptured relationship remained unaddressed, locked, behind the same stoic facade he had maintained throughout my childhood. As for Michael, our paths crossed only once in that first year, at a cousin's wedding where family obligation had brought us both. He avoided direct conversation, but I overheard him describing his financial setback to relatives, carefully crafting a narrative that positioned him as a victim of circumstance rather than consequence. The final piece of my healing journey came unexpectedly through Grandma's unsent letters that my mother had discovered. Written over decades, they revealed a woman even more thoughtful and forward-thinking than I had realized. In one, dated shortly after she had added me to her accounts, she wrote, "My dearest Sarah, I'm taking steps today to secure your future in ways I hope you'll never need to know about. I've seen how families can fracture over material things once someone is gone. By making you joint account holder now, I'm trying to protect you from that potential pain. Your father and his wife have made financial decisions I don't agree with, and I worry about what might happen when I'm no longer here. This isn't about love or favoritism. It's about recognizing who will be the best steward of what I've built." Reading her words, I felt a profound sense of being seen and understood across the divide of death. She had anticipated the very betrayal that occurred and had done everything in her power to protect me from it. On the anniversary of her death, I visited her grave alone, bringing a small bouquet of her favorite lavender roses. Sitting beside the headstone, I told her everything that had happened: the betrayal, the confrontation, the resolution, and my ongoing journey toward healing. "You prepared me for this in ways I didn't understand at the time," I said, tracing the engraved letters of her name. "The financial knowledge you encouraged, the independence you modeled, the careful planning you did. It all mattered more than I could have imagined." As I drove away from the cemetery, I reflected on the profound lessons this painful chapter had taught me. I had learned that financial literacy is not just about managing money, but about personal empowerment and protection. I had discovered that family relationships, like any others, must be based on mutual respect and honesty to endure. Most importantly, I had come to understand that true inheritance isn't measured in dollar amounts or material possessions, but in values, wisdom, and self-worth that can never be taken away. Today, 2 years after that Sunday dinner confrontation, I've built a life that honors my grandmother's legacy while creating my own path forward. The legal settlement continues according to schedule. My volunteering has expanded to include financial workshops for young women aging out of foster care, and my relationship with my parents exists in a careful, limited capacity that acknowledges our history without pretending it didn't happen. The wounds have healed enough to no longer dominate my daily thoughts, though the scars remain as permanent reminders of lessons hard learned. If my experience has taught me anything worth sharing, it's this: know your worth, understand your rights, and always keep copies of important documents. Financial knowledge isn't just for career advancement. It's a form of self-protection in a world where even those who should love you most might make decisions based on their own interests rather than yours. And if you're struggling with family, betrayal, or loss, remember that healing doesn't mean forgetting or even necessarily forgiving. It means building something new from the pieces left behind, something that might be differently shaped but can be whole and beautiful in its own right. So I ask you, have you ever experienced a betrayal that forced you to stand up for yourself in ways you never expected? Or have you had to redefine what family means to you beyond blood relationships? Share your stories in the comments. Your experiences might help someone else navigating similar difficult waters. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe so we can build a community of people supporting each other through life's unexpected challenges. And remember, sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't what's left to you. It's what you build from the strength you find within yourself when tested. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I wish you wisdom and courage on your own path forward.
Knowing that this girl was being controlled by someone using a slave ring, Rio removed the collar to free her, and she said that the person who ordered her to hunt her close to Rio was the noble boy who pushed Laura down. The brisk-skinned girl introduced herself as Latifa, and since she had nowhere to go right now, she begged to go with Rio. The two of them went together to the unexplored eastern land, and during an overnight camping, Rio had her mention Tokyo in her sleep. So, Rio knew that she was also the Japanese who were reincarnated into this world like him. They had headed straight for a huge oak tree to continue, and and while taking a break in the middle of the road, Rio encountered a group of demi-humans. Seeing that Rio didn't show any hostility, the girl leader Sarah talked to him, but when they saw Latifah sleeping in the tent, they rushed to attack Rio because they thought he had kidnapped a person among their fellows. Rio alone couldn't resist all force, so he was quickly taken back to the demi-human village. And when Latifah regained consciousness, a misunderstanding were cleared up. So, the village chef forced the demi-human girls to quickly apologize to him. The next day, Rio was invited by the village chefs to the meeting with them. And they were very grateful to Rio because he protected one of their kind, Latifah. Right after that, Rio was met by a female tree spirit as well as the people's god named Darius. And she discovered a humanoid spirit like her residing inside of Rio. Then said that he was perfectly capable of using spirit art. Rio and Latifah have been prepared by the village chefs for a beautiful tree house. And Sarah's group will also live here to protect them. In the time that followed, Rio learned spiritual art and many other new things from the people of the village. And he was considered by the people here as an extremely important friend. In a place not far from the village, Reis and one of his servants went to the dragon's cave, and he stole one of their eggs. So the dragon chased him to claim it again. Meanwhile, everyone had a party to celebrate Rio's 1-year anniversary with Latifah coming to their village. And the big-skinned girls were constantly clinging to Rio after drinking too much. Reis had a servant carry the egg to lure the dragons away, and he was sneaked into the dragon's den to steal all of their eggs. Reis